right, guys. We are just waiting for a couple more people to join up because I see a couple of people that are in the document that haven't quite pulled the link. I'm also going to post this real quick to Schoology so that anyone else can also join in. And then once that's done, we'll go ahead and get started. All right. And for those of you just joining in, we will get started in a minute. I am just popping up an announcement real quick in Schoology so that people have the link. And then we will get rolling. Okay. And for those of you who are already here, if you guys have the live stream questions pulled up on your computers and you can kind of like split screen it, that'd be good to keep up. And if anybody wants to type in notes as we're going, that would help out just so that, you can have a basically that the document can be a written kind of set of notes to accompany the video. If not, that's perfectly okay. We can just keep on rolling the way we're rolling. Okay. All right, now we have the link sent out in Schoology. So let's go ahead and get started today. All the way from South Carolina. Oh my gosh, hey, how are you, Hannah? Oh, hey, Philip. Hope school's going well. I love that Mesopotamia video you sent me, by the way. All right, let's see. All right. For some reason, it kicked me offline, but I think I'm back now. Yep. Okay. So it may be spotty from time to time. The Wi-Fi hates me sometimes, but that is the way it is. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and let's get rolling with our review. I want to make sure that you guys have everything you need for your first LEQ tomorrow. So let's make sure that you guys are set. I've got the document pulled up right here. And we're looking at 5 major questions. And it looks like the ones that I've got questions on, we've got a whole bunch. Have a great day, Hannah. I hope you're having a good time and hope you enjoy coming back for Thanksgiving if you do. If not, good luck with finals. All right. So let's go ahead and let's get started with question number 1. I'm just going to start at the top and work my way down. So question number 1 that you guys have here is, what is some good context for the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire? Okay, that's a great question. And one of the things that we kind of struggle with a little bit is that notion of the Ottoman Empire. Yes, Angelica, this is only for the AP classes because tomorrow they've got an exam with the LEQ. Did I accidentally post this to Kay? I don't want to freak you guys out. All right, let me see. Oh, sorry about this, guys. I had some technology issues signing in. For some reason, my my account wouldn't link up, but we got it sorted. So that's kind of why we had a little bit of a late start here. And now I'm making sure that I didn't scare my K classes by telling them they had a test tomorrow. Okay, good now. All right, so let's get rolling. Right now we've got the, here we go. All right, so what are some good context for the Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire? That's a great question. And I know one of the things that we struggle with a lot, especially on these the first LEQs, is making sure that that's solid. So a good context for Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire, you can pull from a couple. One of the easiest ones to hit right there is the conquest of Constantinople. If you talk about the fall of Constantinople and the rising power of the Ottoman Empire, you can talk about how the Ottoman Empire then starts to have to bring in the new territories that they've taken over that tend to be a different religion, namely Christianity, Eastern Orthodoxy, or Judaism. And that's how you can kind of segue into the Ottoman Empire and the Devshirme with the Janissaries. So that's probably your solid bet, is that fall of Constantinople. In addition to that, you could also discuss perhaps religious interactions in that time too. So you could talk about how Muslim states tended to use the jizya, or that tax on non-Muslim citizens. You could also go into the Byzantine Empire and Orthodox Christianity as itself. So either way you go about it, you could probably also use the religious kind of interactions as that context. But again, I'd probably recommend for that one, I personally would go with the conquest of the Byzantine Empire by the Ottoman Empire. The next question, I asked a couple of questions on, so I'm going to kind of double check this as I go. Can you go into depth on the religions of the land-based empires? And I was kind of curious as to what religions and in what context. And it looks like we've got any religions that are involved with the empires we've been learning about and just information on them. Also how they were syncretized into different areas. Okay, so tell me if I'm wrong, but from this one, I'm reading that syncretization prompt that you guys saw and were worried about. So with syncretization in this time, a prompt like that, you can deal with two different ways. First of all, you can approach it with syncretization and the active syncretization during this unit. For that one, I would probably go with the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire at this time has some leaders that are purely Islamic over a Hindu majority. And that leads to syncretization, especially under the reign of Akbar. So under Akbar, you had, he removed the jizya tax, which allowed for non-Muslims to practice their religions for free, and essentially kind of moved more towards a religious tolerance period. In that period, he actually invites several notable members from religions to come to his palace and discuss things. And that right there leads to a lot of syncretization, including the eventual rise of Sikhism. Now, Sikhism doesn't start there. It kind of has its roots there. And that is, oh, hang on. Let me make sure I get this right. Okay. Because I always mess up the saying. I always mess up the pronunciation of it if I don't like read it directly. Just give me one moment. Okay, Din-e Ali. So that's Dinilahi. And that right there is the syncretic religion under Akbar that essentially takes elements from several religions and puts them together. So while, yes, Akbar originally was part of the Mughal dynasty, which was an Islamic dynasty ruling over a Hindu majority, under Akbar, there's a lot of syncretization and even a new religion being pumped out. So that's one of the easiest examples to hit for that syncretization prompt. In addition to that, some other syncretization that takes place during this time, you've got Zen Buddhism is the other big syncretic religion here. That's going to take place in the Qing China. Basically, what's going to happen there is that as the Qing are taking over, the Qing are themselves more Tibetan Buddhists in their private life. However, in public, especially in China, they are publicly very like Confucian scholars. Both of these are to legitimize their power, but truly, I believe that they were more in line with the Tibetan Buddhists. And this will lead to syncretization of Tibetan Buddhism into what's called Zen Buddhism, which is a more more in tune with spirituality. And Zen Buddhism will also eventually travel over to Japan, where it's still very practiced today. So those are two examples of syncretism that would help prove this. But again, you can always argue against your prompts. So here you can talk about how syncretization does happen, but you can then also talk about other religions that stayed the same. So namely, you could talk about, for example, Orthodox Christianity, and how Orthodox Christianity under the Ottoman Empire, or not under, sorry, under the Byzantines still exists in places like Russia. Although there is some light changing and some syncretization there as well, it mostly is a continuation of previous elements of that religion. In addition, you also have Christianity in Europe staying the same. And in the Ottoman Empire, you have Sunni Islam staying mostly the same, with some small syncretization with elements of the Janissaries, for example. Does that kind of help answer that question? If not, if I missed what you were trying to ask, make sure you drop that in the comment section. That way I can make sure that I can address it as well. Our next question is, can you review the Safavids and the Mughals? And right there we've got, in what regard, specific questions, the religious conflicts or lack thereof. Okay. So the biggest thing there is that the Safavids are Shia Muslims, whereas the Mughals are Sunni. This leads to a lot of tensions, seeing as the Safavid Empire is right between, on one end, the Mughals, and on the other end, you've got the Ottomans, both of which are Shia Muslims. And so basically, the big conflict there derives from that. They view each other as somewhat heretical or going against the religion. I believe in one instance, for example, there was an Ottoman who was speaking about the first four caliphs in the Safavid Empire, and he was not welcomed to do so. So that basically had to change the law to be like, no, Ottoman emissaries can say these things so that we don't have as much of a conflict. But ultimately, that religious conflict helps to lead to some tension between those, both the Safavids, the Ottomans, and the Mughals, and that will inevitably lead to the end of the Safavid Empire. While the Safavid Empire does collapse under itself, it had some real big internal problems that definitely helped build towards that. The Ottoman tax farming. Ottoman tax farming is pretty simple. So essentially, the tax collectors would go out to collect taxes, and they would collect more than what the empire itself was wanting. And they would do that because they wanted to keep it for themselves. And so they became very wealthy for it. Unfortunately for them, they also started taking too much, and the peasantry started getting pretty upset by that. So what that inevitably leads to is the peasants revolting in the Ottoman Empire because of their tax collection. So that's a great example for maybe a counter argument, or you could also use that to just support the notion that, yes, while tax collecting is a way to consolidate power, it also is something that could lead to a downfall. It's not just the tax farmers, but also the zamindars we see as they kind of gather more and more power because of their position, even though they were originally intended to consolidate power. The tribute system, the ones that we're going to look at, we've got two that are in land-based empires. So in Afro-Eurasia, we have the Qing dynasty. And the Qing dynasty, while they did conquer quite a lot, including China, Manchuria, Upper Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, Outer Mongolia, they also had Tibet, as well as a lot of the eastern part of what is now China. The Qing didn't conquer everybody, though. Remember, they used force when they needed to use force. And other than that, they would actually try to rely on diplomacy. And this is where the tribute system comes in. The Qing dynasty are essentially viewing themselves as better than everybody else. And it's very clear that they are because, you know, they've taken over everybody else. So they require for those people to give tribute to them. So to basically pay them kind of like a bribe to continue letting them be on their own. So kingdoms like Korea, kingdoms like Vietnam, would pay tribute to the Qing dynasty, and then that way they're kind of like a territory in a way. They're underneath the Qing dynasty, but they're autonomous. They're still sovereign, so they keep their own power, just paying tribute to those who are better. So that's the whole notion of the tributary system in Afro-Eurasia in the Qing dynasty. But we also can compare that to the tribute system that's over in the Aztec Empire. So with the Aztec Empire, when they conquered, they would make an agreement with local peoples that they basically owe them X amount of goods. So they either owe them cloth, armor, weaponry, and they owe them that at a regular interval. And the Aztec would basically collect that instead of taxes. They would collect goods. So as they collect that, basically was it, unless they didn't meet what they were supposed to give, in which case, yes, the Aztec would turn to military tactics. Next up, explain the Ivans and Peter the Great. Okay, so the Ivans in Russia, we have the first Tsar, Ivan III. He was a high-ranking member in Moscow, and whenever the Golden Horde had gotten kind of weak in that region, and Ivan took advantage of that. Because he was in a position to essentially amass wealth because of tax collecting in payment for the Mongols, Ivan had a lot of support. Number one, because everybody didn't really want the Mongols there anymore. And number two, because he had the financial ability to back it up. So he will drive the Mongols out in their moment of weakness. So Ivan III becomes the first Tsar, or Caesar of Russia. The first king is kind of an equal term. So basically what ends up happening is Ivan III strengthens his rule, but Ivan IV is the one who really starts to expand Russia. So Ivan III does kind of move out a little bit, but Ivan IV is the one who conquers Siberia, or begins conquering Siberia. And in kind of a momentous occasion, he wanted to make sure it was remembered. And that's why St. Basil's Cathedral was built, as essentially a celebration of Ivan IV, or Ivan the Terrible's conquests. And that's another one of those examples of that monumental architecture supporting a ruler's lead, or legitimizing a ruler's power. Peter the Great was a Romanov, and the Romanov family came to power. It's a different royal family because the Ivans were there, but they died without an heir, leading to the time of troubles in Russia, which, by the way, is great context for Peter the Great. I didn't mean that connection. So we've got Peter the Great. He is a Tsar of Russia, and basically he spends some time in his youth going over into Europe. Now he travels around for a while. He even gets a job as a shipbuilder and works there for months. And Peter the Great essentially comes back to Russia thinking that Russia's a little bit behind where Europe is at this time. And they were behind because the Mongols had been there for hundreds of years, just taxing them to death. So Peter the Great is essentially going to try a couple of different things. First, he's going to try and deplete the power of the church. So he's going to challenge the power of the Orthodox Church. And the easiest kind of evidence of that is his beard tax. So the beard tax is all about the Orthodox Church having that, growing a beard as part of a spiritual act. So he taxes that as a way to kind of not only dig at the church, but at the boyars, or the nobles who followed that church. Secondly, he's going to implement a whole bunch of reform to try and deplete the necessity of serfdom. He'll also take a warm water port in the Northern Wars, St. Petersburg, which allows them to trade and build their own navy, which Peter the Great actually helps build, because remember, he had that experience as a shipbuilder. So what ends up happening is Peter the Great does push for that westernization of Russia, but ultimately, unfortunately, has the effect of intensifying serfdom rather than doing what he had intended and depleting the reliance on serfdom. The boyars and gentry. Okay, so with gentry was a little bit weird. The best way to kind of think about gentry is in terms of China. Gentry are your landed nobles in China. Boyars are your landed nobles in Russia. Now, I said that gentry, or the presentation did talk about how gentry was also in Europe, but that's kind of it's more nuanced, and we're not going to worry about Europe until our next unit. That's where we're really going to start to dive into that. So for now, just know that the boyars, they were the land-owning nobility in Russia who are essentially in a power struggle with the king, especially under Peter the Great. And then the gentry in China, those are those landed nobility. And we've seen them kind of go back and forth with the emperor on who has more power. Under the Qing, the emperor had more power, but the gentry are kind of in a weird spot because now there's a new system of elites, the Qing bannermen. Okay, Sam, you said he consolidates power by taking it from the church. Yes, Peter the Great, one of the ways that he consolidates power is by taking more away from the specifically Russian Orthodox Church. And that's kind of a continuation of the pattern of how religion can legitimize power, but it also challenges power. So like, for example, in the Mughal Empire, you have the Mughals who are Islamic ruling over a Hindu minority. So that leads to a little bit of tension and conflict sometimes. Oh, I'm so sorry, Phil. I just missed that. Could you talk about Confucianism in China for religion that stayed the same? Yes. So Neo-Confucianism is still the major kind of belief system. Now, I wouldn't say religion, but belief system in China. And that is a continuation because the Qing adapt Confucianism. That being said, the Qing still burn books that talk bad about the Qing. So they, I wouldn't say remain exactly the same, but its major beats, they do. They stay the exact same. They just can't talk bad about the leaders. They can't say the leaders aren't being Confucius. But yeah, the Qing rulers did kind of try to present themselves as Confucian scholars, as evidenced by the Qing imperial portraits. We see a lot of them with the books in front of them. I think that we have worked our way through our list. So if anybody has any questions, make sure to drop those down in the live stream chat. For me, it's right over here. I think that's the same for you guys. But make sure that you guys can, I want to make sure that you guys have another opportunity here to ask any questions, just in case we covered something that rose more questions, or just in case I didn't cover something that you were curious about. So I'll give you guys about a minute or two here to type them up. And then if we don't have anything going from there, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. You can also ask questions about LEQ formatting or strategies for the LEQ itself. I am here to help you, not just with content, but also with the skills that we're testing out tomorrow. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not seeing much in the way of questions here. So just to kind of wrap up, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of advice on how to get ready for tomorrow. First things first, eat a good breakfast, eat a good lunch. Nothing like too crazy that'll make you sleepy, but definitely eat something that'll give you your energy. And remember, you don't actually have to finish your essay. Instead, focus on getting your points. Focus on making sure that your context is rock solid before you move on. Focus on making sure that thesis is airtight. The best way to make sure that your LEQ is good is to make a good thesis. So if it takes you 10 to 15 minutes to finish your intro out of the 40 that we have, that's fine. Another thing that I've noticed is that students who map out their essays before they go by jotting down evidence and planning out what their bodies are going to be, like their body paragraphs are going to be about, tend to do better on this because it helps them to kind of feel in control and to have a roadmap to follow. Because that's pretty much all your thesis statement is going to be. It's a roadmap to follow. We got a couple of questions that popped up here. How were empires impacted by diverse populations? Ooh, excellent question. Is that Kemshi? I'm not sure who you are. We got Shloka also asking, to argue against the prompt, we would do one paragraph agreeing and one disagreeing, and then what does a thesis consist of? Okay, so let's start off with the empires impacted by diverse populations. Another easy one for that would be the Ottomans and the Janissaries. So diverse populations doesn't necessarily mean that they're of different. Oh, hey, Lethan. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're from different places. But it is the case because a lot of these empires are getting really big. The Ottoman Empire is a great illustration of how you have a Islamic ruler and then you have non-Islamic subjects. And they deal with that in a couple of different ways. First, you've got the jizya, the tax on non-Muslim citizens. That's one example of how they deal with non-Islamic peoples that they're ruling over as an Islamic ruler. The jizya allows people to practice their own religion, which means that for this time, the Islamic Empire was, or sorry, the Ottoman Empire was very tolerant of that. As long as they paid their taxes and followed the laws, it was fine. So that was the way that they dealt with religious difference. Another way that they're going to deal with diverse people is whenever they take over a region, they're going to institute the devshir, the blood tax. So one way that they're going to do that is they're going to take the children and turn them into janissaries or visors, as well as convert them to Islam. This serves two purposes. Number one, you have a fanatic, devoted group of military elites to help consolidate your power. And number two, if you have the children of an area that you've conquered, they're not probably going to rebel against you, knowing that the people they're going to send to fight you are the children that you've taken. So it is kind of a bit of both. But in reality, the janissaries were well off. And again, sometimes mothers would actually be privy to this. They would want their children to be part of it. So the Ottoman Empire is one way to deal with diverse populations. Another one you could look at is the Qing. So the Qing deal with different populations different ways. They're going to institute the Q on China, for example, that haircut with the long braid in the back as a way of making sure that they understood their subjugation. Whereas in areas like modern day Korea or Vietnam, they instead instituted the tribute system. So for them, they dealt with diverse populations by being more strong-handed against some and less strong-handed against others where they didn't need to be. So those two are pretty solid. The Mughals as well. You can talk about the notion of the Hindu majority and the rulers who were in the Islamic minority. To argue against the prompt, you can do. Sorry, I'm shifting gears and I forgot to bring it back. Shloka asked, to argue against the prompt, would you do one paragraph agreeing with it and a second disagreeing? That's one way you can go about it. There are a couple of different ways that you can do it for complexity. You can do it as one paragraph that argues and builds this, one that argues kind of against it, and then comes to the conclusion that the original idea is more sound. You can also do it to where each paragraph brings up multiple perspectives on an issue. And kind of weaving that complexity throughout. That's going to make a stronger paper, but it's also a little bit more difficult to pull off. So either way would work. And then, Gene, we've got, what does a thesis consist of? A thesis consists of two elements. It's got an argument, or essentially it's an opinion that can be argued against. So if you bring it up and you say, for example, gunpowder was the biggest way or the most important way that the land-based empires expanded. That's an argument because you can say, well, gunpowder mattered, but there's this other thing that's also super important. Like, look at the Aztecs. They didn't have guns and they still had a land-based empire. So essentially, as long as you're arguing a point, as long as you're bringing up something that somebody else can say that's not right to, that's your argument. And then you're going to need a second portion, a line of reasoning. So you need to tell your reader why your argument is valid. So essentially, this is your roadmap. The best way to think about it is, this is where you're going to say, this is my underlying argument, and this is the evidence that I'm going to use to support it. And for that, you want to bring up your evidence. You don't want to explain it, but you do want to say, taxation is one way that they consolidated power because, one way that they consolidated power, as we can see with the success of the Ottoman tax farmers and the rise of the Zamindars in the Mughal Empire. So in other words, you're just saying your argument and then following it up with the evidence that you're going to explain throughout your essay. All right, guys, so I don't see any more questions popping up. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this bad boy up. Tomorrow, make sure that you guys are, oh, no, I got one more question. I'll answer this question real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. So Sam asks, can you talk about salaried samurai and zamindars? Okay, so salaried samurai are the Japanese equivalent to your knights in Europe. So originally, they were the ones who were protecting people in return for essentially payment and goods. So they were loyal to their people. They wanted to protect their people. But under the Tokugawa shogunate, the samurai began to be paid a salary by the shogun. This makes them loyal not to their people, but to their paychecks, to the shogunate. And so that is that rising military elite, but it also shows that shift in kind of the momentum, that consolidation of the power. Zamindars, those are the tax collect, or not the tax collect, I'm sorry, they were the landed nobility in the Mughal Empire, and they ended up having so much land and power by the end of it that they were actually able to challenge the Mughals themselves. Totally not Sydney. Why was the main practice of collecting taxes in silver important? Oh, Sydney, I'm glad you asked. It's because it was one of the direct causes for the collapse of the Ming Dynasty. While it was a smart idea to collect taxes in silver or other hard currencies, it was a move to kind of combat the notion of inflation that was happening with paper money, meaning that there was too much paper money in circulation, so it lost some of its value. The easiest solution and the most obvious was to switch to a hard currency, because a hard currency, gold, silver, you can't just make more of it up. It's metal. But then what happens is the Spanish find a lot of silver in the New World. The Japanese find a lot of silver in Japan, and they know that that's the only thing that the Chinese want to trade for. So the demand for silver rose. They found more silver. They found so much silver that they drove the value of it down, which means that the Ming Empire, after having collected all of its taxes in hard currency, is now left with a bunch of hard currency that is essentially worthless. This, coupled with the famine brought on from failing crops due to the Little Ice Age, are the two big things that kind of lead to them weakening and needing to ask for help from the Qing to go up against toe-to-toe with the Japanese. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so for your LEQ tomorrow, guys, keep your heads cool. Keep a list of good evidence in your head and make sure that you guys have more than you need going in, because y'all, when you're doing it for practice, it's nice and easy, but whenever you put yourself into a situation where you're stressed, your brain tends to freak out a little bit. So make sure that you guys have more than you need, because that's going to keep your brain happy, because you have something else you can pull from. Remember, you guys have this, you know your stuff. Now you just got to put it on paper. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys have a great evening, and I will see you all bright and shiny tomorrow.